The West Piers of ENV. Sandra Bullock walked onto the red carpet of the exclusive Parisian fashion show, her every step exuding grace. She wore a beige dress, simple yet elegant, a stark contrast to the flamboyant gowns and shimmering ensembles surrounding her. She had never needed to scream for attention. Her presence alone commanded it. The air inside the grand venue buzzed with excitement. Celebrities, influencers, and designers mingled under the dazzling chandeliers, their conversations merging into a sea of murmurs. Sandra took her seat in the front row, her posture poised and her expression serene. But not everyone admired her quiet confidence. A few seats away, two well-known influencers, their designer-clad bodies wrapped in arrogance, exchanged smirks and hushed whispers. "That's Sandra Bullock, right?" one of them murmured, her voice dripping with condescension. "Yes, but honestly, beige at a show like this." The other replied, suppressing a giggle. "She was a star years ago, but now she just looks outdated, trying to stay relevant." They laughed softly, fully entertained by their own words. They assumed Sandra wouldn't hear them. They assumed wrong. What they didn't know, what they never could have anticipated, was that someone else had heard them too. Someone whose very name commanded respect. Someone whose presence alone could silence an entire room. Keanu Reeves sat just behind them, and in the next few moments, he would change everything. A familiar face in a cruel crowd. Sandra, however, remained composed. She had heard their words, but she had long since learned to ignore petty remarks. The entertainment industry was ruthless, and she had endured its highs and lows. She had risen above criticism time and time again. Still, she couldn't deny that their words stung. She had come here to enjoy the show, not to be a spectacle for the judgmental elite. Just as she was about to look away, she felt a warm presence beside her. "Mind if I join you?" a familiar voice asked. Sandra turned, and there he was, Keanu Reeves. Her heart swelled with gratitude. Keanu had always been a grounding force in her life. They had worked together, laughed together, and supported each other through the years. If anyone understood the weight of fame, the cruel whispers, the constant scrutiny, it was him. She smiled. Of course. Keanu took his seat beside her, his sharp eyes scanning the room. He had already noticed the influencers, their shallow laughter like nails on a chalkboard. But instead of confronting them immediately, he did something much more powerful. He waited, a moment that would change everything. The show began. Models strutted down the runway, draped in stunning couture. Flashbulbs flickered. The audience watched in awe. But Sandra couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Sure enough, out of the corner of her eye, she caught the influencers still whispering, still laughing behind their hands. Their amusement hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown. She clenched her jaw. Keanu, sensing her unease, leaned in. "You good?" he asked, his voice soft but firm. Sandra nodded. "I'm fine." But Keanu wasn't convinced. And then, as if on cue, one of the influencers decided to take things a step further. She pulled out her phone. Without a shred of hesitation, she started recording. Sandra felt the heat rise in her cheeks. They weren't just making fun of her anymore. They were turning her into a joke for their followers. Keanu saw it too. And in that moment, he decided he wasn't going to sit back and let it happen. He was going to teach them a lesson they would never forget. The lesson begins. Just as the influencer lifted her phone higher, clearly about to capture Sandra in an unflattering light, Keanu moved. Deliberately. With an effortless grace that only he could pull off, he leaned over and completely blocked Sandra from the camera's view. The influencer frowned. Then he did something even more unexpected. He turned to Sandra and, loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear, said, "You look stunning tonight." The words rang through the air like a perfectly timed melody. The influencers froze. Sandra's breath caught in her throat, and the entire front row turned to look. Keanu wasn't done. "You know, it's rare to see someone with real class these days," He continued, his voice smooth yet sharp. Most people just follow trends. They forget that true elegance doesn't come from what you wear. It comes from who you are. The influencer holding the phone visibly paled. Keanu turned slightly, his piercing gaze locking onto them. "Isn't that right?" he asked, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. The two influencers swallowed hard. They knew. They knew they had been caught. And now, everyone around them was watching, waiting, judging. The tables had turned. The power of silence. The whispers had stopped. The laughter had vanished. Now, there was only silence. Sandra could feel the shift in the atmosphere. The influencers, once so smug, now looked mortified. They avoided eye contact, their faces burning with shame. For the first time, they weren't the ones in control. Keanu had spoken, and the weight of his words had shattered their cruelty. They had underestimated him. They had underestimated Sandra. And now, they would never forget this moment. The final blow. Keanu leaned back, his job done. The show continued, but the two influencers were no longer watching. They were too busy staring at their hands, their phones forgotten. Sandra exhaled slowly. She turned to Keanu, her lips curving into a small smile. "Thank you," she murmured. Keanu simply grinned. "Anytime." And just like that, the lesson was learned. But the story wasn't over yet, because what happened next would send shockwaves through the fashion world. And Sandra, she was about to prove, once and for all, that class was something no influencer could take away. The unseen power of grace. The atmosphere inside the grand Parisian fashion venue had shifted. What was once a place buzzing with whispers and shallow laughter had turned into a silent witness to a moment of raw, undeniable truth. Keanu Reeves had spoken, and the weight of his words had done something that no amount of fame or wealth could undo. It had exposed the cruelty lurking beneath the glamour. Sandra Bullock sat beside him, her heart still racing from the encounter. The influencers who had mocked her now sat rigid, their faces drained of arrogance. Their laughter had vanished, replaced by something else entirely. Fear. The fear of being seen for who they truly were. The show continued, models gliding down the runway in extravagant ensembles. The audience clapped politely, but the energy in the room had changed. More and more eyes kept darting toward Sandra and Keanu, as if waiting for something more to unfold. Sandra exhaled slowly, regaining her composure. She had spent decades in the industry. She had faced ridicule before. But this time felt different. This time, she wasn't alone. Keanu had made sure of that. But little did they know, this moment was about to ripple far beyond the confines of the fashion show. Because someone else had been watching. And they were about to turn this quiet act of kindness into something far bigger than anyone could have imagined. The viral storm begins. Sandra shifted in her seat, sensing the subtle shift in the room's energy. She could feel the eyes on her, but it wasn't the usual Hollywood scrutiny. It was something more. The two influencers, now awkwardly silent, were pretending to be interested in the show, but it was clear they were unraveling. Their fingers twitched over their phones, itching to spin the situation in their favor. Too late. Across the room, someone else had captured the moment. A young woman, a rising journalist for a prominent fashion magazine, had recorded everything. She hadn't just caught the influencer's cruel remarks. She had caught Keanu's powerful response, Sandra's unwavering grace, and the undeniable silence that had followed. And she was already uploading it. The caption was simple, yet devastating. When class meets cruelty, Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock show the world what true elegance looks like. Within minutes, the video was everywhere. Social media exploded. Hashtags like #ClassOverClout, #Sandra and Keanu, and #TrueElegance began trending. Celebrities chimed in. Fans reacted with fury toward the influencers. Thousands of people began calling them out for their behavior, and before they even left their seats, their names were being dragged across the internet. Sandra and Keanu had unknowingly sparked a movement. A night of consequences. The show finally ended, but for the two influencers, the real nightmare was just beginning. Sandra and Keanu stood to leave, their quiet dignity a stark contrast to the chaos unraveling around them. The influencers tried to slip away unnoticed, but it was impossible. The very people they had tried to impress now wanted nothing to do with them. Luxury brands were already distancing themselves. Their sponsors, silent. The crowd, watching. Sandra, ever the professional, simply adjusted her dress and walked forward. Keanu matched her stride, his presence a silent shield against the negativity surrounding them. But just as they reached the exit, one of the influencers, now desperate, reached out. "Wait," she blurted, her voice cracking under the weight of panic. Sandra paused, turning slowly. The influencer's glossy confidence had crumbled. She looked small now, her carefully crafted persona slipping through her fingers. I didn't mean," she stammered. Keanu arched a brow, waiting. The influencer swallowed hard, then tried again. "It was just a joke." A joke. Sandra tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. A long pause. Then, with effortless grace, she finally spoke. "A joke at someone else's expense isn't a joke," she said softly. "It's a reflection of who you are." The influencer flinched as if she had been physically struck. Keanu didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The weight of Sandra's words was enough. Without waiting for a response, Sandra turned and walked out. Keanu followed. And the influencer? She stood there, frozen, as the world she had built around herself began to crumble. The aftermath. Outside, the paparazzi were waiting. Sandra and Keanu were met with flashing lights and shouted questions. "Sandra, what do you have to say about what happened inside?" "Keanu, did you plan to call them out?" "Are you aware the video has already gone viral?" Keanu placed a gentle hand on Sandra's back, guiding her toward their waiting car. Sandra paused before getting in, her eyes scanning the crowd. Then, in the same calm, unwavering voice that had silenced an entire room, she simply said, "Kindness is always in style." And with that, they drove away. The world takes notice. By the time Sandra and Keanu returned to their hotel, the internet had erupted into a full-blown phenomenon. Major news outlets picked up the story. Fashion critics praised Sandra's understated elegance, while social media praised Keanu's unwavering support. The influencers. They had been dropped by several brands within hours. A day later, one of them issued a public apology. But it was too late. The world had already chosen a side. And it wasn't theirs. A new beginning. Sandra sat by the window of her hotel room, watching the city lights twinkle below. She had never sought out moments like this. She had never needed viral fame or dramatic takedowns, but she had always believed in grace. And now, she had proof that grace mattered. Her phone buzzed. A message from Keanu. "Keanu, how's it feel to be the internet's new icon of class?" Sandra chuckled, shaking her head. "Sandra, I didn't do anything special." His response came almost instantly. "Keanu, you proved that kindness is strength. That's special." Sandra exhaled, warmth filling her chest. Maybe he was right. Maybe, in a world obsessed with appearances, simply being kind was the boldest statement of all. And maybe, just maybe, this was only the beginning. When kindness becomes a movement. The sun had barely risen over Paris, yet the world was already talking. Sandra Bullock sat in the quiet stillness of her hotel suite, a cup of coffee warming her hands as she stared at the city skyline. She had spent decades in the spotlight, but nothing had ever felt quite like this. Her phone was buzzing nonstop. Messages flooded in from friends, colleagues, and even strangers, people who had seen the video and felt something shift inside them. The video of Keanu's quiet but firm defense, of Sandra's grace under pressure, had sparked something no one had expected. What had started as a moment of simple kindness had turned into a movement, and Sandra was beginning to realize that she couldn't ignore it. The unexpected invitation. A soft knock at her door broke the silence. She opened it to find her assistant, Laura, standing there with a stunned expression. "You might want to see this," Laura said, stepping inside with a tablet in hand. Sandra took the device, her brows furrowing as she scanned the screen. The headline on a major news site read, "Class over clout. Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves spark global conversation on kindness in the industry." Sandra blinked. It wasn't just a trending hashtag anymore. It wasn't just viral outrage over two influencers. It had become bigger. Fashion designers were speaking out about how true elegance came from within. Other celebrities were sharing their own experiences of being dismissed, ridiculed, or underestimated in the industry. A-list stars had begun posting their own stories, using hashtag #ClassOverClout as a way to uplift one another instead of tearing people down. But that wasn't all. Laura pointed to another message, this one from an unexpected source. "You just got invited to be the keynote speaker at the Women in Film and Fashion Summit next month." Sandra inhaled sharply. The summit was one of the biggest events in the industry, a place where real conversations about representation, respect, and change took place. And now, they wanted her to speak. She had spent years letting her work speak for itself. But this was an opportunity to say something louder. She set the tablet down, her mind racing. "You should do it," Laura said gently. Sandra nodded slowly. Maybe it was time. Keanu's quiet wisdom. Later that evening, Sandra found herself on the phone with Keanu. "You're really doing it?" he asked, his voice warm with approval. "I think so," she admitted. "I never expected any of this, but maybe it's important." Keanu chuckled. "It is important. People look up to you, Sandra. And the world needs more people who remind them that kindness isn't a weakness." Sandra smiled, shaking her head. "How do you always know what to say?" "I don't," he said simply. "I just know that sometimes the world needs a reminder of what really matters." Sandra exhaled, letting the weight of his words settle in. Keanu had always been like this, quietly wise, effortlessly grounded. He didn't need the spotlight, yet somehow his presence always changed the room. And now, without even meaning to, he had helped spark something bigger than either of them. The influencers fall from grace. Meanwhile, across the city, the two influencers who had mocked Sandra were scrambling to repair their reputations. Their carefully crafted images were crumbling. Brands had cut ties. Fans had unfollowed in droves. They had issued public apologies, but it was clear no one was buying them. For the first time, they were experiencing what it felt like to be on the receiving end of scrutiny. And the worst part, no one felt sorry for them. Because people weren't just angry, they were tired. Tired of watching the industry reward cruelty. Tired of the idea that clout mattered more than character. And now, thanks to one small moment at a fashion show, people were choosing to celebrate kindness instead. A stage bigger than she ever expected. A few weeks later, the day of the Women in Film and Fashion Summit arrived. Sandra stood backstage, her heart pounding as she prepared to step onto the stage. She had given speeches before, but this felt different. This wasn't about promoting a film. This was about something real. Something bigger. The room was packed with industry professionals, journalists, and fans. And in the front row, Keanu. Ever the quiet supporter, he had come without making a big deal about it. But Sandra knew his presence alone was a statement. Taking a deep breath, she stepped onto the stage. The room fell silent. She looked out at the sea of faces, took a moment to collect her thoughts, and then began. "Not too long ago, I sat at a fashion show, minding my own business, when two people decided to make me their entertainment," she said, her voice steady. A murmur rippled through the audience. "I've been in this industry long enough to know that criticism comes with the job. But what struck me wasn't what they said. It was how many people around them laughed." The room was still now, hanging onto her every word. She continued. But then, something else happened. Someone, who I'm lucky enough to call a friend, reminded me that kindness is always in style. And in doing so, he reminded all of us. She glanced at Keanu, who gave her the smallest, knowing nod. That moment went viral. Not because of drama, but because people wanted to believe that respect still matters. That class still counts. That kindness isn't something we should ever let go of. Applause erupted. Sandra pressed forward. If we want the next generation to understand that real elegance isn't about what you wear or how many followers you have, then we have to be the ones to show them. The applause grew louder. And that starts here, in this industry, with us. By the time she finished, the entire room was on their feet. Sandra stepped back, overwhelmed by the response. As she walked off stage, Keanu was waiting for her. "Told you," he said with a grin. She laughed, shaking her head. Okay, you were right. About what? About kindness being the real power in this world. Keanu simply smiled. Always has been. The legacy of a moment. Sandra's speech wasn't just a moment. It became the beginning of something. Fashion brands started shifting their focus to genuine, authentic role models. More celebrities started using their voices to celebrate character over clout. And as for Sandra, she had never felt more at peace. She had spent years proving herself in Hollywood, always letting her work speak for itself. But now she understood something even deeper. Sometimes the greatest impact you can make isn't through the roles you play. It's through the way you choose to exist in the world. With kindness, with grace, with real power, and with people like Keanu Reeves reminding her that she never had to do it alone. WHANDA world takes notice. The applause still echoed in Sandra's ears as she walked off the stage. The energy in the room had been electric, alive with a force she hadn't anticipated. She had spoken from the heart, but she never expected her words to resonate this deeply. Backstage, Keanu stood waiting, his familiar, steady presence grounding her. "You did good," he said simply, his dark eyes filled with something that almost looked like pride. Sandra exhaled, shaking her head. "I didn't plan on this becoming, well, a thing." Keanu chuckled. The best things usually aren't planned. She knew he was right. The #ClassOverClout movement had taken on a life of its own. What started as a single moment at a fashion show had turned into something bigger, a worldwide conversation about kindness, dignity, and what it really meant to have influence. But with attention came scrutiny. And not everyone was happy about the way things had unfolded. The industry reacts. The Women in Film and Fashion Summit had barely ended before news outlets exploded with headlines. Sandra Bullock's speech sparks a Hollywood reckoning. Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock, the unexpected icons of elegance. Influencers versus authenticity. Is social media's reign coming to an end? Fashion critics praised Sandra's understated grace, calling it a much-needed reminder in an industry obsessed with superficiality. Celebrities started sharing their own experiences. Actresses, models, even designers. People who had once been ridiculed for their simplicity, their quiet confidence, came forward, using the movement to uplift each other instead of tearing each other down. And then there were the other reactions. The ones who weren't so pleased. The influencers tried to fight back. The two influencers who had mocked Sandra at the fashion show had already suffered public humiliation. Their brand deals had vanished, their followers had turned on them, and their once curated image of perfection had been shattered. But they weren't ready to give up just yet. A week after Sandra's speech, they resurfaced. This time, with a different approach. A carefully crafted apology video. Tears, regret, promises of growth. The usual PR script. "We never meant to hurt anyone," one of them sniffled, dabbing at her eyes with a manicured hand. "We were just caught up in the moment. We've learned so much from this, and we want to use our platform for good moving forward. The comments section, however, wasn't so forgiving. You're only sorry because you got caught. Apologizing after losing brand deals isn't growth, it's damage control. Funny how they weren't sorry until the world turned against them. It was clear the world had changed. People were no longer falling for empty apologies. They wanted authenticity. And that was something money couldn't buy. An unexpected offer. Meanwhile, in a sleek, high-rise office in Milan, a world-renowned fashion mogul was watching Sandra's speech on repeat. Her name was Isabella Moretti. One of the most respected names in haute couture, Isabella had built her empire on elegance, not excess. She had seen fashion trends rise and fall. She had seen influencers come and go. But this was different. Sandra Bullock had ignited a movement, one that aligned perfectly with Isabella's vision of timeless beauty and grace. And she knew an opportunity when she saw one. That evening, an email was sent. An invitation. Sandra Bullock was about to receive an offer that could change the entire fashion industry. A call that changes everything. Sandra was in her hotel room when her phone rang. Laura, her assistant, answered first. Sandra, you might want to take this. Sandra raised an eyebrow. Who is it? Laura handed her the phone. Isabella Moretti. Sandra blinked. Isabella Moretti was legendary. Taking a steadying breath, she put the phone to her ear. This is Sandra. A warm, accented voice responded. Ah, Sandra, it is an honor to finally speak with you. You have caused quite the stir, my dear. And I must say, I like it. Sandra chuckled. That wasn't exactly my intention. Ah, but the best revolutions are always accidental. Sandra leaned back in her chair. I take it you didn't call just to compliment me. Isabella laughed, a rich, full sound. No, my dear. I called because I have a proposal. Sandra listened carefully as Isabella laid out her vision. She wanted to create a new fashion campaign, one that celebrated timeless beauty, confidence, and class. And she wanted Sandra to be the face of it. I know you are not a model, Isabella continued. That is exactly why I want you. You represent something real. And that, my dear, is what this industry is missing. Sandra was speechless. She had spent her life in Hollywood, but she had never imagined herself as the face of a global fashion movement. But maybe this was bigger than her. Maybe it wasn't just about what she wore. Maybe it was about what she stood for. Keanu's take on it. Later that night, she called Keanu. Let me get this straight, he said, amused. You're about to become the new face of elegance. Sandra groaned. Don't say it like that. It makes it sound ridiculous. It is ridiculous, he laughed, but in the best way. Do you think I should do it? She asked, suddenly serious. Keanu was quiet for a moment. Then, in his typical way, he said something that made everything click. You didn't ask for this, but sometimes the world chooses you for something bigger than yourself. Sandra exhaled. Besides, he added, you are the reason this movement started. Why not take it to the next level? And just like that, she knew her answer. She was going to do it. Not for fame, not for attention, but because the world needed to be reminded of something simple. That kindness is powerful, that grace is timeless, and that no matter how loud the world got, the people who moved with dignity would always be remembered. The future of #ClassOverClot. The announcement came a week later. Sandra Bullock, the new face of the elegance movement. The fashion world erupted. Some loved it, some hated it, some tried to fight against it. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just a trend. It was a shift. And Sandra, she had just become the symbol of a movement that no one saw coming. When the world sees you is CLASSOVE or see loud. The moment the announcement went public, the world exploded. Sandra Bullock, the face of the elegance movement. Not a model. Not an influencer. Not a social media personality. Just her. A woman who had spent her life choosing grace over gossip, kindness over cruelty, and dignity over desperation. The fashion world was stunned. Some celebrated it as a long overdue shift toward real elegance. Others weren't so thrilled. And then there were the ones who wanted to fight back. Because the influencers who had mocked her, they weren't done yet. And they were about to make one last, desperate attempt to reclaim the power they had lost. The backlash begins. Within hours of the announcement, a new wave of social media outrage began. But this time, it wasn't directed at the influencers. It was directed at Sandra. She's an actress, not a model. Why is she taking opportunities from actual models? This is just another example of Hollywood privilege. So now being rich and famous means you can steal the spotlight from hardworking influencers. It was clear what was happening. The influencers, backed by a few desperate social media stars clinging to relevance, had launched a counterattack. They were trying to paint Sandra as the villain, trying to twist the narrative, trying to turn the world against her. But what they didn't realize, the world had already made its choice, and it wasn't on their side. The public stands with Sandra. For every hateful comment, there were thousands of voices rising to defend her. She didn't take anything from anyone. She was chosen because of her seal ass. If you want to talk about privilege, maybe start with influencers who bully people for clout. Sandra has been in this industry for years without drama. If she's the new face of elegance, it's because she did. Even other celebrities jumped in. From actors to designers to fashion photographers, people who had seen the toxicity of the industry firsthand were speaking up. And Keanu. He didn't say much. But when the attacks on Sandra escalated, he did something even more powerful. He showed up. Keanu's silent statement. The launch event for the elegance movement was being held in Milan. It was meant to be an intimate affair. High-profile guests, designers, media figures. But when Sandra arrived, cameras started flashing wildly. Because walking beside her, dressed in his usual effortless style, was Keanu Reeves. He didn't give interviews. He didn't make a speech. He didn't need to. His presence alone sent a message louder than any words could. He was there to support Sandra. And the world noticed. The final desperate move. The influencers had tried to control the narrative. They had tried to turn people against Sandra. And when that failed, they resorted to one last desperate move. The leaked expose. 2 days after the launch event, a scandalous article surfaced online. The headline was designed to be damning. The truth about Sandra Bullock, Hollywood's fake queen of elegance. Inside, the article accused her of everything they could think of. That she had always been part of Hollywood's elite and had no right to speak about real struggles. That she wasn't as nice as she seemed, and that some anonymous sources had described her as cold and distant. That she was just another celebrity trying to stay relevant. It was meant to be a takedown. It was meant to ruin her. But instead, it backfired spectacularly. Because the public wasn't stupid. They saw what was happening. And they weren't buying it. Sandra's response, or lack of one, when the article started gaining traction, people expected Sandra to respond, to defend herself, to fight back. But she didn't. She said nothing. Instead, she did the one thing the influencers couldn't stand. She continued to live with grace. She didn't engage in their drama. She didn't post a reaction. She didn't give them the attention they craved. Instead, she let the world answer for her. Within hours, the so-called expose was ripped apart by journalists, media professionals, and even other celebrities. This is nothing but a smear campaign. Notice how they're trying to take her down just because she's being celebrated. Grace doesn't need to defend itself. It just keeps winning. And just like that, the attempted scandal collapsed. Because when you build a career on clout, your power is only as strong as the drama you create. But when you build a legacy on grace, nothing can destroy it. The world's final verdict. By the end of the week, The influencers who had started this entire mess had vanished from the public eye. Their followers had abandoned them. Their brand deals had dried up. And their names, they had become cautionary tales. Meanwhile, Sandra's campaign was thriving. Her face was on billboards across the world, not as a model, but as a symbol of dignity, of strength, of timeless elegance. And Keanu, he remained by her side, not because he had to, but because he believed in what she stood for. One night, after a long day of press interviews, they sat together in a quiet lounge overlooking the city. Sandra sighed, sipping her wine. "I never expected any of this." Keanu smirked. "You keep saying that. And yet, here we are." She laughed softly. "Do you think it'll last?" "The movement." Keanu leaned back, considering. "People have short attention spans," he admitted. "But real change, that stays." Sandra looked at him, thoughtful. "Then maybe it wasn't just about me." "It never was," he said. "It was about reminding people of something they already knew, but forgot." She smiled, because she knew he was right. And maybe, just maybe, the world was ready for something real. For something that didn't need controversy to be seen. For something that would last long after the trends faded away. Because class was forever. When LGCY oututization fame, the world had spoken. Sandra Bullock was not just a symbol of elegance anymore. She had become the standard. The #ClassOverClout movement had reshaped the industry in ways no one had predicted. What began as a quiet stand against cruelty had turned into a global shift. Brands were reevaluating their partnerships, audiences were demanding authenticity, and influencers who had built their careers on drama were watching their platforms crumble. And at the center of it all, Sandra. Not because she had planned any of it, but because she had proven that true grace didn't need an agenda. Yet, even with everything that had happened, she wasn't prepared for what came next. Because now, Hollywood was watching. And someone very powerful was about to make her an offer that could change everything. A call from Hollywood's most powerful man. Sandra was in Milan for a follow-up meeting with Isabella Moretti when her assistant, Laura, rushed in. "You're not going to believe this," Laura said, barely containing her excitement. Sandra raised an eyebrow. "I feel like you say that a lot these days." Laura handed her the phone. "It's Richard Ellington." Richard Ellington. Sandra froze. Richard Ellington was Hollywood's most powerful producer, the man behind some of the biggest films of the past 2 decades. And he was calling her. She took the phone, her heartbeat quickening. "This is Sandra." "Ah, Sandra. Finally, we get to talk," came Richard's deep, polished voice. "You've been quite the topic of discussion lately." She chuckled lightly. "That seems to be a recurring theme." Richard wasted no time. "I won't beat around the bush. We want you back in Hollywood. But not just for any role. For the role." Sandra's brows furrowed. "I wasn't aware I left Hollywood." Richard laughed. "You know what I mean. The industry changes. And right now, you are the most relevant person in the world, not because of controversy, but because you represent something real. People trust you. They believe in you." Sandra leaned forward, intrigued. "And what exactly are you offering?" "A legacy project," he said smoothly. "A film that isn't just a blockbuster, but a statement. A story about grace, dignity, and choosing character over fame. A movie that cements your real legacy in this industry." Sandra exhaled slowly. She had always been selective about her roles. But this was different. "Who's directing?" she asked. Richard hesitated for a split second. Then he said the one name she never expected. A reunion she never saw coming. "Martin Scorsese." Sandra's breath hitched. Martin Scorsese wanted her. The man who had built a career on films about power, corruption, and the brutal nature of fame. He wanted her to be at the center of a film about grace. Richard continued. "Marty's fascinated by what's happening with you. He wants to tell a story about what real power looks like in Hollywood. No scandals, no betrayals, just the quiet strength of a woman who outlasted them all. Sandra leaned back in her chair, stunned. She had spent her life being part of great films. But this sounded like history in the making. Then Richard added something else. "One more thing," he said. "We want Keanu too." Sandra's eyes widened. "Keanu?" "Of course," Richard said. "You two together. It's lightning in a bottle. The world already sees you as Hollywood's last true icons of class. Why not own it?" Sandra glanced out the window, her mind spinning. This wasn't just another movie. This was a statement, a declaration that kindness and grace weren't just nice ideas. They were power. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready to make that statement in the biggest way possible. Keanu's take on it. Later that night, Sandra sat across from Keanu in a quiet Milanese cafe. "Scorsese wants us," she said, still a little in disbelief. Keanu raised an eyebrow. "Us? Like, together?" She nodded. "A film about grace outlasting fame, about dignity being more powerful than clout. Basically, about everything we've been through these past few months." Keanu smirked. "Let me guess. Richard Ellington is behind it." "Bingo." Keanu leaned back, taking a sip of his coffee. "You interested?" Sandra studied him. "You don't seem surprised." He shrugged. "I figured something like this was coming. The world wants this story." Sandra sighed. I don't want it to feel performative. This movement wasn't supposed to be about Hollywood cashing in on a trend." Keanu's gaze softened. "Sandra, you are the movement. This isn't about Hollywood making money. This is about you proving that grace is bankable, that it sells, that the world wants more of it." She exhaled. "So you think I should do it?" Keanu smiled. "I think you already know your answer." And he was right. Because for the first time in a long time, Sandra knew exactly what she had to do. The announcement that shook Hollywood. The next morning, the industry erupted with news. Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves reuniting for a Scorsese film about elegance, legacy, and the power of kindness. It was the kind of movie no one saw coming. And yet, it was exactly what the world needed. The excitement was instant. Film critics called it a brilliant move. Fans flooded social media, calling it the ultimate comeback. And the influencers, they watched in silence. Because they knew. The fight was over. Sandra had won. But not because she destroyed them. Not because she sought revenge. She won because she had done the one thing they could never understand. She had chosen to rise above it all. The future of #ClassOverClout. With the film underway, the #ClassOverClout movement reached new heights. More brands shifted toward authenticity. More celebrities chose to embrace grace over gossip. And Sandra, she had officially cemented herself as Hollywood's last great icon of dignity. One night, after a long day on set, Keanu and Sandra found themselves sitting side by side, watching the sunset. Sandra sighed. "Do you think this will last? Or is this just another phase?" Keanu thought for a moment. Then, in his usual way, he said something simple, but powerful. "You don't change the world by waiting for it to catch up. You change it by showing people a better way." Sandra smiled, because she realized that's exactly what they had done, and no one could take that away. When Lee GND's Lee VALEJC, the world had watched in awe as Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves took an unexpected stand, one rooted not in controversy, but in class. What had started as a fleeting moment at a fashion show had transformed into a movement. #ClassOverClout had reshaped industries, forced social media figures to rethink their influence, and put Hollywood's obsession with fleeting fame under a microscope. But nothing compared to what was coming next. Because this wasn't just about trending topics anymore. This was about legacy. And Sandra was about to leave one that no one would ever forget. The film that changed everything. Production on the Scorsese film had begun. The industry had never seen anything like it. A film about grace, about dignity, about true power, the kind that didn't need to shout to be heard. And at the center of it all, Sandra and Keanu. The world was already watching. But when Scorsese made a last-minute casting announcement, Hollywood nearly imploded. Because joining the project was none other than Meryl Streep. The moment the news hit, it was all anyone could talk about. Bullock, Reeves, and Streep. This is a masterclass in elegance. This isn't just a film. This is Hollywood reclaiming its soul. Every influencer who built their career on drama is screaming right now. Sandra was stunned when she heard the news. She had always admired Meryl, but to work with her on this film, it felt surreal. But when they finally met on set, Meryl simply smiled and said, "This story matters, Sandra, and I wouldn't miss it for the world." That's when Sandra knew. This wasn't just a movie. This was history in the making. The influencers. While Hollywood was celebrating the rise of #class over clout, the opposite was happening for the influencers who had started it all. Their desperate attempts at a comeback had failed. The smear campaign against Sandra had backfired. And now, they were watching as the industry that once welcomed them with open arms moved on without them. Brand deals had dried up. Followers had abandoned them. Other influencers, terrified of being next, had distanced themselves completely. And then came the final blow. A massive exposé was released, revealing how certain influencers had bought followers, staged scandals for views, and manipulated audiences for profit. The names of the two women who had mocked Sandra at the fashion show. Front and center. The very people who had tried to make her a joke were now Hollywood's biggest cautionary tale. And Sandra, she never once had to say a word. She had won by simply refusing to play their game. A night to remember. Months later, when the Scorsese film was finally completed, it premiered at the Cannes Film Festival. The anticipation was unreal. As Sandra and Keanu stepped onto the red carpet, the energy in the air was electric. The cameras flashed. The world watched. And in that moment, something became crystal clear. This wasn't just about a film. This was about a shift. A shift in what audiences valued. A shift in what Hollywood valued. A shift in the kind of power that would define the next generation. As they entered the theater, Sandra stole a glance at Keanu. "You realize what we've done, right?" she asked. Keanu smirked. "I do. But you say it first." Sandra exhaled, looking around at the crowd, at the excitement, at the history being made. "We proved," she said softly, "that class isn't just in style." Keanu nodded. "It's forever." The film began. And as the world watched the story unfold on the big screen, one undeniable truth settled into place. This wasn't the end of the #class over clout movement. It was only the beginning. Because trends fade. But legends last forever. The AFTERMAT. Sandra's film shattered box office records, proving that substance could sell just as much as sensationalism. #class over clout became a global initiative, with major brands pledging to prioritize authenticity over social media hype. Sandra and Keanu were officially recognized as Hollywood's last true icons of grace, their names cemented in history. The influencers who had tried to tear Sandra down, forgotten. And in the end, the message was clear. You don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to destroy to win. You don't need clout to be powerful. Because true power comes from grace, and grace is timeless.